Hello everyone, and welcome to this lecture on critical and descriptive writing. We will examine the difference between these two forms of academic writing, why both are necessary, and how to move from presenting information to developing a reasoned, evidence-based argument. By the end of the lecture, you should be able to recognize descriptive and critical writing, evaluate the evidence and arguments of other writers, and develop an academic voice that is confident, fair, cautious, and supported by evidence. The central distinction is simple. Descriptive writing presents information. Critical writing uses comparison, evaluation, interpretation, evidence, and reasoned judgment to develop an argument. Both may appear in the same essay, report, dissertation, or research paper, but they serve different purposes. Understanding descriptive writing. Descriptive writing reports or narrates information as it is. It may explain what happened, define a concept, describe a process, summarize a theory, present the findings of a study, or report another writer's ideas. Its purpose is often to establish background and context. Readers may first need to understand the history of an issue, the meaning of key terms, the sequence of events, or the main findings of previous research. Description provides that foundation. The problem arises when the writing stops there. If you only tell the reader what happened or what another writer said, you are presenting information but not yet transforming it into your own argument. This matters especially when your academic work requires you to analyze, evaluate, assess, compare, or discuss. In such cases, accurate description is necessary but not sufficient. You must also explain why the information matters, how reliable it is, how it compares with other evidence, and what conclusion can reasonably be drawn. Understanding critical writing. Critical writing begins when you stop accepting information automatically. Instead of simply repeating another writer's conclusion, you examine the argument and the evidence on which it is based. You may ask, what evidence supports this claim? Is it reliable? Is the reasoning logical? Are there weaknesses in the method? Is anything important missing? Are there alternative explanations? Does another source reach a different conclusion? How relevant is the evidence to the question I am answering? Critical writing does not mean disagreeing with every source. You may accept a conclusion, partly accept it, reject it, or treat it with caution. What matters is that you explain why, using the quality of the evidence and reasoning rather than personal preference. This is how you develop an academic voice. It does not appear merely because you use the word I or state an opinion. It appears when you select evidence carefully, compare positions, evaluate strengths and weaknesses, and reach a conclusion that follows logically from your analysis. A descriptive writer can remain a reporter. A critical writer participates in the academic debate by weighing evidence, making judgments, acknowledging uncertainty, and defending a reasoned position. Moving from description to critical analysis. Consider a simple example. A descriptive paragraph might state that study A found that online learning improved student participation, while study B found that some students experience reduced engagement. This reports two findings but does not analyze them. A critical version might explain that study A measured participation through attendance rather than the quality of engagement. Study B therefore qualifies the first finding by showing that greater attendance does not necessarily mean active learning. When considered together, the studies may suggest that online learning improves access while producing uneven effects on engagement. The information has now been compared, evaluated, qualified, and used to support a reasoned conclusion. A practical process for critical writing. A practical way to improve critical writing is to follow a deliberate process. First, read actively. Identify the writer's conclusion, reasoning, evidence, assumptions, and limitations instead of accepting the claim automatically. Second, evaluate the strength, quality, credibility, and sufficiency of the evidence. Consider whether the method and sample are appropriate, whether the evidence is current, and whether the conclusion is stronger than the evidence can support. For example, if a study involving only 20 students at one university finds that most of them prefer online learning, the findings may describe that particular group. but they would not justify the broader conclusion that all university students prefer online learning. Third, compare the source with other evidence. Look for agreement, disagreement, alternative interpretations, stronger methods, and factors that may have been overlooked. Fourth, judge cautiously. Decide which conclusions are persuasive, which require caution, and why. A careful judgment is usually stronger than an exaggerated claim. Fifth, contribute your own reasoning. Do not end after summarizing sources. Explain how the evidence supports, challenges, or qualifies the argument you are developing. Sixth, conclude logically. Do not introduce an unsupported new claim or make a stronger statement than the evidence permits. Finally, acknowledge important limitations in the evidence, reasoning, or conclusion. This often increases credibility because it shows that you understand the boundaries of your argument. For questions for evaluating sources. When reading a source, for questions can help you decide how it should contribute to your writing. First, consider the quality of the evidence and argument. Is the claim supported by reliable evidence? Is the method appropriate and is the reasoning logical? Second, identify the source's strengths and weaknesses. What does the writer do well, what is missing, and what limitations deserve comment? Third, assess its relevance and usefulness. Even a high-quality study may not closely match your question, context, population, or issue. Fourth, decide how to integrate it into your argument. A source should not appear as an isolated summary. It may support a claim, provide an example, challenge an assumption, reveal a limitation, or help justify your conclusion. Developing an appropriate academic voice. A strong academic voice combines confidence with caution, judgment with fairness, and opinion with evidence. The first quality is healthy skepticism, not cynicism. Skepticism means asking for evidence and withholding belief until the support is sufficient. Cynicism is generalized mistrust. Critical writing requires careful evaluation, not automatic rejection. The second quality is confidence, not arrogance. State a well-supported position clearly, but do not claim more certainty than the evidence allows. Confidence comes from evidence and reasoning. Arrogance dismisses alternatives or treats personal certainty as proof. The third quality is critical judgment, not dismissiveness. A judgment should be based on careful thought and available evidence, not on rejecting an idea simply because you disagree with it. Consider the statement, "The ball is round." By itself, it is not a complete critical judgment. It becomes more acceptable when connected to appropriate observation and measurement. The point is not that every obvious claim needs an elaborate investigation, but that judgments should be supported by reasons or evidence appropriate to the claim. The fourth quality is reasoned opinion, not unsupported assertion. Academic writing may include your opinion, but it must be supported by evidence and explanation. For example, a person may insist that a football is square and refuse to accept that it is round. The confidence or persistence with which the opinion is expressed does not make it valid. Validity depends on reasons and evidence. The fifth quality is fairness, not prejudice or preconception. Assess both strengths and weaknesses, consider competing evidence and alternative interpretations, and avoid selecting only the evidence that supports a predetermined conclusion. Language that supports critical writing. Language can help demonstrate critical analysis. Useful verbs include evaluates, argues, demonstrates, suggests, supports, challenges, contradicts, qualifies, overlooks, and indicates. When evidence is limited, cautious expressions are appropriate. You may say that the evidence suggests a conclusion, that a finding may indicate a relationship, or that a conclusion should be treated with caution. However, cautious wording cannot replace evidence. Words such as possibly, perhaps, and could be do not make an unsupported claim acceptable. A useful sentence pattern is, although the source provides useful evidence for one conclusion, its argument is limited by a weakness in the method or scope. When considered alongside other evidence, the findings suggest a more qualified conclusion. Structuring a critical paragraph. A critical paragraph should begin with a clear point related to the research question and then present relevant evidence or an author's argument. Next, evaluate the quality, relevance, or limitations of that evidence. Where appropriate, compare it with another perspective. Then explain what the analysis means for your own argument. End with a reasoned mini-conclusion or a link to the next point. Do not leave evidence to speak for itself. Explain why it matters, what it supports, what it cannot establish, and how it contributes to your conclusion. Reviewing your own writing. Before submitting your work, ask whether you have moved beyond description and explained why the information matters. Check that you have evaluated rather than merely repeated the evidence. Ask whether you have justified why conclusions should be accepted or treated cautiously, considered alternative interpretations, and supported every important claim with appropriate evidence. Finally, check that you have contributed your own reasoned argument, reached a logical conclusion, acknowledged important limitations, and used a tone that is confident, fair, and evidence-based rather than arrogant, dismissive, or opinionated. Conclusion. Let us conclude with the central distinction. Descriptive writing presents necessary background, definitions, findings, and context. Critical writing takes the next step by questioning, comparing, evaluating, interpreting, and integrating that information to develop a defensible argument. Effective academic writing usually requires both. The problem is not description itself, but allowing description to replace analysis. Once the background is established, explain why the information matters, how reliable it is, how it relates to other evidence, and what conclusion can reasonably be drawn. When reviewing your academic work, do not ask only, have I included enough information? Also ask, have I evaluated that information, connected it to the central question, and used it to develop my own reasoned position? That is the transition from reporting knowledge to participating in academic debate. In one sentence, descriptive writing presents information, while critical writing uses evidence, evaluation, and reasoned judgment to develop an argument. Thank you for watching.